This is the Myco Hangout.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Myco Hangout for this month, the month of October. We are joined by our guest Stephen Axford and his wife Catherine Marciniak. I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce terrible at names here. And they're here to talk to us about their film Fungi Planet and much more. So yeah, if y'all kind of want to introduce yourselves and we'll kind of go from there.
Well, I'm Stephen Axford.
And you're a photographer?
Yeah, I photograph fungi. Have done for quite a while now.
And I'm Catherine Marciniak, and I'm a video maker. I work for our public broadcaster as my day job, making videos, writing articles, doing radio. But in my spare time, I make videos about fungi.
Awesome. Yeah, so do you guys want to break down the film that y'all recently made, or do you kind of want to give y'all a little bit about y'all's background, kind of how y'all got into filming fungi, or let's start from there. Where did this all start? Where did your journey with photographing fungi begin?
Well, it goes back about 10 or 15 years when I started to take photography. I've only been into photography since the digital world came along. So I bought a little digital camera and started to photograph things. And
the filmmakers of the Fungi movie, the documentary on how it's mycorrhizal fungi, how it promotes.
We can barely hear you, Catherine, and
I gave her that.
if I
I don't know. Or Nori,
make me a co-host and I can run interference and
yeah, sorry about that, everybody.
as much as you possibly can. The poor thing, she just whimpers sometimes. She's hurting.
can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine, yeah.
Maybe Kathleen could write her question, given that we can't hear it. Is that possible?
And
sorry, we'll get this under control. Like as a host, I can mute people.
Okay.
Co-host, so I'll mute people as they.
Yeah, she might just have it.
Yeah. Okay, well,
Oh yeah, no, I had half of the garlic chickpea thing.
Sorry about that. I got it fixed now.
Okay.
Okay, well, I've been taking photographs for about 10 or 15 years and gradually got into photographing fungi just because they were beautiful. So I started to take more and more fungi, or fungi as you call it, but we call it fungi. And about 6 or 8 years ago, an American blog called This Is Colossal sent me an email and said, can we share your pictures? And I said, yeah, sure. Didn't think anything of it really. So they just took pictures from my website and put them up on their blog. And I hadn't realized before they did it that This Is Colossal is a very highly respected blog, particularly amongst nature magazines, it seems. So virtually every major nature magazine in Europe, including National Geographic in Spain and Portugal, Roots magazine in Netherlands, Geo in Germany, various newspapers in Britain, all sent me emails saying they wanted to publish my photographs, which they were willing to pay for. So that started the photographs going. Soon after that, the BBC contacted me and they wanted information on luminous fungi. I don't think I responded to them for about 6 months because we'd had these ideas of making films, so I just ignored them. But about 6 months later, I I sent them an email back, and I just started to try time-lapse. I had a second bathroom or a second shower, which I made into a dark room and brought in luminous fungi from outside and put them down in there and filled up the shower with dead bits of wood.
Lost my shower recess.
Luckily, my wife was a filmmaker, so she understood. Well, most wives, I think, would say, no way, I'm not going to do that. So I took some sample time lapses. They weren't particularly good, but they showed what you could do. And I sent these off to the BBC and they just loved them.
Yeah.
So then
it was really the first time, other than a couple of, cultivated oyster mushrooms and the ant, killing cordyceps, really there hadn't been an awful lot of time lapse done on fungi at that time.
And I don't think any done on luminous fungi.
Mm.
So they got them, and this was for Planet Earth 2, which turned out to be the biggest nature documentary in 10 years after Planet Earth 1. And they took about 1.5 minutes or 1.25 minutes of screen time of my fungi time lapse.
I cried when I heard David Attenborough reacting Steve's fungi time lapses that are done in a shed on our property,
Wow, that's so amazing. Yeah, just to be a part of a project like that, because I mean that was just an inspirational set of films that I was glad to be able to watch and see, and then to be talking with some people who had some photography featured in it. It's just pretty amazing because yeah, they're just those are really high caliber stuff, and yeah, it's really an honor to talk with y'all and get to know a little bit more about like the ins and outs of it. So what's it like, or can you kind of break down the time lapse process for people who maybe not be familiar with it, or like maybe time lapse in the context of the bioluminescent fungi?
Well, you need a reasonably good camera, though you need good luminous fungus. Like doing time lapse of ghost fungus, firefox, I think they call it sometimes. They're very dim. So cameras are better than human eyes at seeing them, but they still have a lot of trouble, and getting good quality time lapse is difficult.
The Bioluminescence is the same, isn't it? The Bioluminescence that's luminous is also very dim.
Not necessarily, no.
Oh, okay.
But tropical fungi is better than temperate fungi in this respect. So we're lucky here that we have one called Mycenic, which you can take. I can take a 30-second exposure at, say, f14 or f20.
Tell them about the time that you thought you might go out and see if there was any, because, we're really lucky up here that Mycenic is actually a very common fungus. But, Steve had moved up from Melbourne and had only read about luminous fungi before.
Yeah, and most people actually haven't seen it because you have to go out at night,
right,
when it's dark. So I'd been up here a couple of years, and we had a rain event, as they call it, where you get rain for 4 or 5 days continuously. And I went out at the end of it, turned the house lights off, and went out on a moonless night, took my torch out, I went in amongst the trees around my home, turned the torch off, expecting to have to wait for a minute or so for my eyes to adapt. And there they were, just glowing in the dark, down close to the ground. But you get up close, pick up a stick of them, and they were so bright you could pretty well see your way if you held them close to the ground, or you could read a book by them.
Oh, wow.
So
they grow en masse too. So
yeah, you get a stick and you might get a mass this big of them. So, lots of little ones. Each one might be less than an inch across. So not particularly big by themselves, but you might get 30 or 40 or 50 in one bunch.
So you take that into the studio.
Yeah, so I took photographs of them for a while, and then when I started doing time-lapse, I thought, well, I'll take them into the studio and do time-lapse of them. And they came out brilliantly because they grow quite quickly as far as mushrooms are concerned. They're
Pretty much 2 days, yeah.
yeah, 2 or 3 days for the, to grow from a button to a fully formed luminous fungi.
So time lapses can vary a lot. They can
Right.
vary from, something as fast as that. That's one of the faster ones. Maybe Caprinus would be the fastest.
Yeah.
Yeah. But to weeks and weeks and weeks, if it's a polypore or, so it just depends. And it's so dependent on humidity. It's so
Right.
dependent on temperature. So you can start a time lapse and then it can fail halfway through.
Right.
They usually do.
What's the I was gonna ask, what's the longest time lapse you've done or attempted to do? Like,
About
what's
six-
the most far out one you've done?
There's about the easiest and most difficult ones all at the same time are stinkhorns. And a stinkhorn, as you might know, it forms in an egg. And then at some stage, the egg bursts open and the stinkhorn comes out. Well, when the egg bursts open and the stinkhorn comes out, it can be a couple of hours. They really can be quite quick, and usually no more than about 8 or 10 hours. But they can sit there as an egg for a month or more. So you put a camera on them, knowing that you've got to take a photograph quite frequently, maybe every 3 minutes. And you've got a camera on them for, say, 2 weeks, taking a photograph every 3 minutes.
Of nothing.
Of nothing. And then all of a sudden they burst open.
So very hard on your cameras, and also they're in really damp environments because you can't do time lapses outside in the forest. Well, we toy every now and again with the idea of setting up a tent in the forest to try and capture ectomycorrhizal fungi growing in time lapse because they're connected to the roots of the trees, so you can't kind of pick them up and take them into a studio. But the way that we've got it set up is we've got a shipping container that's got 2 to 3 studios kind of set. We call it a studio, but basically it's a whole batch of rotting wood, a bit of old furniture and some LED lights. And then we've got another little shed. But though you've got to have that kind of control over lighting because you're taking a frame at the fastest one every 2 to 3 minutes, and at its slowest one every hour. Yeah. So you can't have the light flickering. You've got to have a lot of control. So that's basically how he does it. He takes them into the studio, sets up his cameras on power supply, not battery. Very big cards.
Yeah.
Well, I change the card every day, so the cards don't have to be huge, but...
That's more because he's impatient. He wants to see what's happening.
Well, it's not just that. It's... I spoke to a guy, Tim Shepherd, who's done all the Secret Life of Plants and all of that time-lapse for the BBC.
Uh-huh.
He's been doing time-lapse since the days of film camera. And he said with film, what he had to do was have 2 cameras on the subject. So he could develop the film from one, leave the other one on, taking the pictures, and look at the one to see what had happened. Because you can't, if you just look at the fungus, you say, oh, it's just got a bit bigger. So what? It's not very interesting. Whereas if you look at the time lapse, you might notice that, okay, it's got a bit bigger, but it's swayed from side to side or spun around or done something really interesting. Whereas another fungus might just get bigger.
You can also see how fast it's growing and predict a little bit more its trajectory, because there's a lot of informed speculation, we call it, where you've observed different species of fungi and how they grow so that you can make some predictions about where they might grow in the frame. Predictions, I'm saying, because as...
Yeah, often they start in the frame here. No,
And
hang
they
on.
go way off.
Sometimes they do just what you hope, but usually they're, so you need to overframe them.
Yeah. Which is why you need a good camera so that you can then crop down to still a
Yeah.
very resolution. And then
So it's
probably
like,
one of the hardest ones that we've been, obsessed about capturing this more and more is mycelium growing. But that's really, we've tried getting it growing across a leaf bed, so probably a marasmius mycelium.
mhm.
We've tried, and Steve has some beautiful time lapses of mycelium growing, but it's a very tricky thing to try and capture because it's unlike the fruiting body. We just don't know enough about what might make it grow,
Yeah, the best time lapse I've seen of it's probably done in laboratory settings where people have a controlled environment. They set it up to and then photograph it. But we'd ideally be aiming for something that's clearly
in the forest.
Which makes it a little bit difficult. Someday someone will come along and be willing to spend, say, $500,000 on time-lapsing fungi. Now, it's not something I can aspire to at the moment.
Yeah, we don't have an air-conditioned studio or anything like that. We've planted around it to try and keep the temperature constant in there. So we rely on nature to help us do the time lapses.
So if we get a really hot day, say I'm doing time lapse in summer, which I usually do, and it's nice and wet, but then you get a really hot sunny day and the temperature will go up and most fungi will die or at least partly die.
Mhm.
Over 35 degrees.
Yeah, certainly if you get up to, if inside the shed it gets up to 35 degrees, which is what, 95, something like that, I think.
Yeah.
Then it's too hot for most mushrooms to really survive.
Right.
But it is terribly magic doing the time lapses. Steve goes down first thing in the morning when he's got a whole batch going and he'll come up with his cards. And then because I work full time, I'll be getting ready for work. And then just before I go to work, he'll say, come and have a look. So we'll see what's happened over the last 24 hours. And it's magic.
Very cool. So we have a couple quick questions from the chat. Bruce, if you'll be ready in a second, but how much substrate do y'all have to bring into the studio?
Well, we live in an area where most of the fungus are saprobes, so they live on dead wood, leaves, this sort of thing. So I just bring in the bits of dead wood. And I bring in enough to make a set, so that if I take the picture, the fungus is clearly growing in something that it should be. And the background looks more or less right as well.
With the stinkhorns, we'd bring in probably a whole box full of substrate.
Yeah, usually with stinkhorns, they grow on mulch. So like you put in a garden. So you have to dig up a certain area and then keep it inside the shed for a while. So it varies a bit, but I've got a shed full of substrate, let's put it that way.
The shed feels like you're in a rotten gully in a forest. Really.
Because you bring one thing in one year and it fruits, all the mushrooms come up. If you leave that bit of wood, then at some stage later, more mushrooms will come up.
Yeah.
So you don't throw the bits of wood out. You keep them there in the hope that something else will come up.
Until they turn into soil on the bottom of the shed.
I see.
Yeah.
I like it. I like this technique.
We're still really experimenting. There's still so much unknown about what fungi needs to fruit. And, there's some chat that some fungus might need UV light. Some fungus obviously doesn't because, we've just been doing it with LEDs, but now we're experimenting a little bit with putting UV light in and seeing what difference that makes. And the unique thing that we do is that we're doing forest fungi. So a lot of the time-lapse that we see is cultivated fungi. So, we just look at what's growing around us and bring it in.
Cool. So this is a question that's kind of a little bit in a different vein, but What is could you explain a little bit more about bioluminescence and what makes it a little different, or what makes it unique to fungi, or bioluminescence in general, as opposed to glowing in the dark?
Well, glowing in the dark,
Well, it's not the dark, doesn't have anything to do with it really, bioluminescence.
glowing in the dark and bioluminescence are the same thing, really.
Except it doesn't require the dark to glow. It's just that when it's dark,
Right.
you see it glow.
It's
Yeah.
not like, you watch dial where you shine a light on it and it's bright for a while and gradually fades over a period of time. It doesn't respond to light. So it just glows in the dark.
It's a chemical that's within the fungus.
Yeah, there's, they call the chemical lucerafin, but it's just a name. It can apply to a whole range of things. That's just what they call any chemical that does this. Lucerafin and lucerafase. Lucerafase being the enzyme. So the enzyme combines with the lucerafin and it emits light through a cascade of chemicals. But
there's about how many luminous fungi species?
I think there's close to 90-something species of luminous fungi that they've found so far.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of luminous things in the world. Like I read about an earthworm they found in England that was luminous. You say, why is an earthworm luminous?
Yeah, underground.
It hasn't even got eyes.
Right.
No one has any idea, as far as I know, why this earthworm would be luminous.
So certainly with luminous fungi, the theory is that it attracts insects at night.
Yeah, and
to help spread the spores.
But a friend took a photograph of a tree at night, trying to get a star photograph. So he's got a long exposure, takes this tree, and he found there was two things in the upper branches of the tree that were bioluminescent, one green and one red, I think. No idea what they were.
Wow.
But people really don't go out at night and turn their lights off and wait for minutes on end and then document what they see. Well, the people that do that haven't got science degrees and
or the camera equipment to record it so that people can actually see what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
They're bushmen, and those sort of people probably know a lot, but they haven't written it down. They just go, oh yeah, and you go out at night and you see these trees shining blue.
We did, a classic example of that is the one that we're co-authors on a recent paper about a new species of bioluminescent fungus, which we we spotted in northeast India, and it's featured in the documentary. And then we went back with some mycologists who then collected and DNA tested it, and we documented it on photographically in video. But the locals knew about it. It's not like, it's on every kind of piece of dead bamboo during the wet season. They all knew about it, but it had just never been documented by science before.
Yeah, it's hard to miss if you go walking down a forest path at night. You see these little pinpricks of light all around.
Yeah.
So it's obviously there, but no one's come along and not a lot of scientists, I guess, spend their time wandering around in Meghalaya
remote forests on the Bangladesh border.
In the wet season.
In the wet season. Yeah, so, that's a classic, really. And they just say to us when we said, oh, it's new to science. And they said, oh, we've known about it forever.
We didn't know it was special. So kind of a little bit of the wrapping up the bioluminescence portion. Is it the same kind of process that goes on in like algae and certain jellyfish?
It's the same sort of process, yeah. And the reasons why, as with the reasons why most things are either for defense or for attracting things to help with your sporing or for sex. I think a lot of it in the sea is attracting mates. And for spreading your spores, I guess that's the equivalent of sex for fungus.
It's all a light show for sex. So y'all mentioned finding new fungi, in your trips to Northeast India, which I kind of want to get more into your travels in a little bit. But this question comes from the chat and is wondering about like using video technology to just sample for mycological diversity and use that in biodiversity studies. Like, have y'all discovered a lot of different fungi through your video work, or yeah, what are some of the exciting finds y'all have found?
Probably yes. We go over with our friends at the Kunming Institute of Botany in China, and they have told us that when they do mushroom field trips, 1 in 7 species that they collect is new to science, year in, year out. They go back to the same area again, collect more fungi, and there's still 1 in 7 are new to science. So it's not a rarity at all. You get, it's not like you go North America, it may be less than 1 in 7 because there's been a lot more mycologists walking around. But certainly in Asia and Australia, I would suspect the same, maybe even more so in Australia.
The forest that we documented fungi in northeast New South Wales here in Australia, there's been no fungi field research done in there, so, and similarly not in Yunnan, because, KIB, Kunming Institute of Botany, has an amazing team of mycologists and the Botanical Gardens there does a lot of work in those forests as well. So there's been a lot of documenting of fungi in those forests, but still, as Steve said, they say 1 in 7 species is new to science. But the forests that we were doing in northeast India, in Myanmar, in Nepal, we were the first people to ever document fungi in those forests.
Wow.
So when we had a bet running when we were in Myanmar, how many species, and we were only there for 2 weeks, how many species that we're seeing are going to be new to science. And the bet kind of ranged from 10 species to about 30 species. Well, I think it was over 40 species were new to science. So it's very common. And certainly anything really small here in our rainforest, probably.
Almost certainly new to science, because people haven't, there's lots of fungus that gets lumped into a group. You say it's Mycena viscidocruenta or Mycena sect viscidocruenta, saying that there's a whole section, a whole group of mushrooms which are labelled the same thing because they're superficially a bit similar. So any little red Mycena just gets lumped into that. But there are potentially a dozen or more different species there.
Right.
And some of the beautiful little hairy fungus I find, none of them are really specified by specific species. They're just lumped into sections.
And even the fire, we were talking before the session about the documenting of fire-loving fungi. Well, you'd think that with all the fires that we've had in New South Wales, and there's been quite in Australia, and quite a lot of papers written on fire fungi here and also in the US, we've still found species and just on the little bit of field trip that we did up there that people have never seen before, like the scientists never saw anywhere else in the areas that were coming up.
Yeah, we went out there and we documented maybe about 10 different fungi and possibly 3 or 4 or 5 of them. So anything up to half of them were new to science.
So very common. It's the new frontier of scientific discovery. It's one of the reasons it's so exciting.
Yeah, they're meant to be, maybe 4 million different species of fungus on this planet, and we've documented
around 200,000.
200,000.
And that's gone up from 100,000 when we first started doing it 6 years ago. So because of all of you people,
Awesome. So do you think that is just a result of like more people looking, or something like just exploring new ecosystems, kind of a little bit of both of them? What would y'all kind of think about that as?
It's a bit that more people are looking, but the techniques are available now. There's, DNA sequencing. So before it was all done on what the mushroom looked like.
Under the microscope and
they'd stare at it under the microscope and say the spores are this colour, they're this shape, and so on. But they made a lot of mistakes that way, because things that look superficially similar may not even be the same genus.
Right.
They can have just converged in appearance, but are totally different genetically. Or the other way around, that some fungus, like certain Xylaria, grow in completely different shapes at different times and different circumstances. And they were actually listed as separate species.
And, you know, some of the things that we're finding out now that, you know, you could have a cup fungus. There's a cup fungus that's quite common here. What's that pink one?
Philipsia subpurpurea.
Yeah. So we see it on fallen wood, you know, coming up as cup fungus, but it starts its life as a really, you know, micro fungus inside a living plant and does something completely different. And then when the tree, you know, branches fall and they're dead wood, that fungus turns into a whole new looking fungus, but it's still the same fungus. It just transforms.
And it can go back again. So it's not like a caterpillar that turns into a butterfly and, you know, that's it and dies. Fungus can be in one form, change to another, and go back again.
Wow.
So they're just
it's amazing, isn't
modes
it?
of life.
It's such an interesting field of science. So fascinating. We've become obsessed, as you can tell.
And the more you learn, the more you realise you don't know, and the more there is to learn. Every time we go out, we find something new. It was like with the pink slugs that we mentioned before. These giant pink slugs that eat fungus. So they're mixed into the fungus story as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's just so amazing that, yeah, you can just go out and find something new every time you go out and look. But we actually have a question from the chat. So, Angela, if you can unmute yourself and you can ask your question now. Sorry, just kind of waiting for a break in the conversation.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
It's my first Zoom call. Yippee! Catherine. Hello.
Hi.
I don't think your partner's name is Catherine.
It's Stephen.
Hi, Stephen.
Hi.
Hi, Catherine. Hi, Stephen. Stevie and Cat. We could just say that. I'm curious about breeding mushrooms together.
Oh, don't know that we know anything about that, really.
No, we don't know anything about it.
Gotcha.
Look, there's a little interesting aside about that. When we were in Yunnan last year, there was a fungus that we found that was growing saprophytically that had only ever been described as an ectomycorrhizal fungi before.
Oh, wow.
It was actually quite a popular edible as an ectomycorrhizal fungi.
Right.
And so, look, very early days on this, but, you know, like really interesting because it's very hard to cultivate ectomycorrhizal fungi. But if you've got an edible that is growing saprophytically, then you could potentially find, and it's the same fungi that grows ectomycorrhizally, then you could potentially find out where in the DNA the shift is between the ectomycorrhizal one and the saprophytic one, and then be able to apply that to other fungi that are also edible ectomycorrhizal ones that you want to cultivate on some kind of medium. So that's a kind of little bit futuristic in terms of what your question was, but it is where some of the thinking is going with mycologists who are doing that field forest work and then seeing what applications there can be to, you know, mushroom industry. But for us, we're not really, I mean, we do a lot of work on assisting mycologists and communities to identify toxic and edible mushrooms for field guides, and particularly at sustainable village level in Asia. But we're not really mushroom cultivators. We're more documenting the biodiversity of fungi in the wild, and then assisting people in whatever way we can with whatever they're doing with their research in terms of that documentation.
We'll document people who are growing fungus, but
Yeah.
we grow
see.
fungus, but only really for time lapse.
Yeah.
So far,
We're interested. We're interested. Like if I didn't have a full-time job, I'm certainly interested. Like some of the fungi we see in our forests here, we live in what they call a fungi-phobic country. Yeah. So where we go in Asia is fungiphilic. You know, they're in areas of Nepal, not all of Nepal, certainly in Myanmar, in northeast India, and totally in Yunnan. And we were supposed to go to Mexico this year, and they also, like in Mexico, I think they eat 600 species of fungus. And in Yunnan, they eat 900 species of fungus. Like that is just extraordinary. So people know a lot about fungi there. And so some of the fungus that we see in the forest there, we certainly see lookalikes in our subtropical rainforest here. And if I wasn't working full-time, I would be very interested in getting involved in some pilot research to see if we could DNA that forest fungus, see if it's appropriate for cultivating, and then do some pilot programs. But that's a little bit in the future for us. But that's as close as we come to kind of the whole mushroom edible industry.
I see. So you mentioned a few places that y'all have traveled to in China, Myanmar, and Southeast India. Where else have y'all been to document fungi and just take photographs, and some of your favorite places?
we went to Chile for a holiday and spent a good amount of our time documenting fungi.
Caught up with Juliana.
Oh,
Turkey,
cool.
and a team from Florida University, California University, Kew Gardens. So we went on a fungi field trip in Patagonia with Harvard University, Don Vista, Tula Niskanen from Kew Gardens, who's a Cortinarius. So when you were talking about new species, I mean, Tula will say in Europe, she'll still find new Cortinarius. Who would have thought in those forests? But anyway, so yeah, we documented fungi with them in Patagonia and the Lake District for a little while. That was just stunning. I would give anything to go back to Patagonia.
Go to Patagonia if you can. We didn't find any fungus in the Atacama, but we probably didn't look hard.
Probably
It's a tad dry out there.
Well, it was quite wet when we were there.
Oh, really?
It's strange. Yeah.
Interesting.
We have fungus. Someone asked me that the other day. Do we get fungus out in Central Australia in the desert country? And yes, you do. So there's certainly fungus that the Aboriginal people there use for medicinal purposes.
Yeah, fungus is probably more important to the environment out in the desert than it is in the rainforest. It's just that fungus out in the desert doesn't fruit very often, and it's not very easy to find.
So it's mycelium under the ground or inside the trees.
But back to where we've been. We've been just in documenting fungi, Chile. We've been to Thailand, China on 4 or 5 occasions, Myanmar, Northeast India, and Nepal. So mostly in what's called the Eastern Himalayas. So from the eastern edge of Nepal across Northeast India, Myanmar, then into Yunnan. One of the most fascinating areas in the world, and big mountains.
Yeah. I would love to visit that area so much, just for the mountains alone, and the culture is I don't know, obviously so different, but just like rooted and extremely old, and I don't know.
Incredibly diverse cultures as well, because there's all the hill tribes. So you can get one tribe on one hill, and the next hill, just within easy sight of the other hill, will be a completely different tribe, because you have to go down the hill and up the next one. By hill, they're fairly severe hills.
Probably, I mean, last year, being in Nepal, we went up to the rhododendron forest, which are between Kachinjunga and Makalu, So we were probably sitting at about
3 to 4,000.
3 to 4,000 meters, and they were rhododendron and magnolia forests, and a lot of ectomycorrhizal fungi and pine forest as well. And
So it's about 10,000 feet.
and we were just staying in this tiny little village of about maybe 6 houses, and our attic. Poor Steve, all the ceilings were like this high.
Oh, my head got seriously damaged.
We had scarring across his head, but I actually twisted my ankle the first day that we were there. So I spent a lot of time in this little attic room editing the film Planet Fungi Northeast India on my laptop, and it was just the most beautiful experience. It was a cloud forest, and so every now and again I had this tiny little window in my room just opened, and every now and again a cloud would come in. So I said, "Who's that cloud in my room?" And then it would disappear. And meanwhile, these guys were out in the forest, these beautiful young. That is the other thing, is we work with a lot of amazing young scientists from these countries, you know, and that just is, that's a privilege. So Steve was out in the forest with a young ecologist from Nepal, and also a young woman that I was mentoring to do media, so teaching her video and photography. And it was just such a special place, wasn't it? And we were up there. That's the other thing. We stay put. So we were there for a week. And yeah.
No tourists, because the tourists don't really go to these areas. Well, they don't go to these areas very much at all. And they certainly don't go there in the wet season. So we go up and the forest is alive, and
we do occasionally get landslided in, like we did up there.
Oh, no.
Because you're in the wet season.
Right,
Honestly,
yeah.
The worst part for me, Myanmar, oh my gosh. You know, Myanmar, where we were, was in the Chin state. And the Chin state, every road is built halfway up a mountain that is just dirt with nothing growing on it, with a sheer drop down there. It was just like really, and pouring rain. So everything's like mud. And I just kept my eyes closed for 2 weeks every time we went back into the car.
We got stopped by a landslide from going as far as we'd wanted to, which was, it was lucky the landslide happened just before we were meaning to travel up there, because when the landslide happened, it came down and it took out the pipes to a hydro power station. So there were these huge pipes that go down maybe a couple of meters in diameter, transferring the water from a river up high up. And of course, when the pipes broke, they just took away half the side of the mountain.
Yeah.
And they didn't, we were there for 2 weeks, I think. And
3 weeks.
Yeah, we were in Nepal for nearly 4 weeks. And they hadn't
repaired the road.
They hadn't repaired the road.
We would have been still up there probably.
Yeah. They would have had to helicopter us out. Was the only way to get out. Or walk, which was going to be fairly difficult.
But it's very hard to choose, a place that is better than any other. They're all so different. When we're in New Zealand, we stay in research facilities that are run by Chinese, like the Botanical Gardens or a university. And so we're in the middle of the forest usually, with a whole bunch of scientists, and that's a really interesting experience, whereas when we're in Nepal, Myanmar, Northeast India, we're pretty much doing a road trip from forest to forest, connecting up with the locals, recording what they know about their local fungi, and then moving on again, occasionally dipping into a festival.
Cool. What is the highest altitude that y'all have found fungi at?
Above 4,000 meters.
4,000?
Yeah.
12,000 feet.
A place we'd really love to go back to, actually. It's called Dechin. It's right on the border of Tibet and Yunnan. And there was a lot of beautiful ectomycorrhizal fungi there, lots of russulas, lots of boletes. Beautiful forest. Again, very short rhododendron quercus forests.
So could you kind of tell us a little bit more about the film? Not the fantastic fungi, the fungi, planet fungi.
We've got a lot of stuff in Fantastic Fungi.
I know, that's why because I listened to y'all's your talk with Mushroom Revival, and so they kind of some of those points stuck in my head, and so I knew y'all had a bunch of good stuff in there too. But yeah, so tell us about Planet Fungi.
So up until we did Planet Fungi, usually when we went overseas, it was all about Steve and what he does. It's about his photography and, you know, the way that people use that for field guides and use it for their research papers. And so the collaboration has been very much about that. And then just because I'm a video maker, I just couldn't help myself, really. I just started recording video wherever we were, whether it was about the field trip that we were on, the scientists we were with, or whether it was just about what local people knew about fungi. And then that just started to grow. So then the second time we went over, I did more of that. Third time I went over, they were actually asking me to do that. You know, can you please do the ethnomycology, we call it. So then when we went to Northeast India, normally we're working with mycologists. So we're just the documenters, right? Mycomedia, we call it.
Yeah, so we go racing around in the forest and the mycologists find all these fungi and I'm sitting there taking photograph after photograph after photograph.
Hundreds, thousands.
So I'll document vast numbers of fungus that they find. So they've not only got, you know, the description, the DNA sequencing of the sample and all of this, but they've also got some really good pictures of them.
Mm.
So it just fleshes out what they do and they can produce local field guides and things like this because most of the local people don't really understand the science all that well. I can't say that I do in a lot of cases either. But
So then when we got invited to India by the Balapara Foundation, who are working in that area, they call it elephant country, really. It's that area of Assam where the Brahmaputra comes down, so northeast India. They call it Seven Sisters states. So you've got, so Bhutan is a different country. That's kind of there. Calcutta's down here. And then you've got the Seven Sisters, which border Burma, Myanmar, Tibet at the top, and then Bangladesh at the bottom.
And Nepal, so it extends to Sikkim.
Yeah.
And so if you go across that, there's Sikkim, Bhutan, which isn't part of India, and then goes into Arunachal Pradesh,
which is just below Tibet. And so it was a fascinating area because they're really trying to conserve the forest there. There's still quite a bit of forest there, and they're working really hard with local people, the forest dwellers, to work with the forest to conserve it. But, you know, they had never done any fungi work, and they'd connected up with our collaborators in Yunnan as part of an Eastern Himalayan scientific group. And they just realised that they knew nothing about fungi or the role that it played in the forest or how it could be even sustainable industries for the local people. So they wanted us to do what we did in Yunnan. The difference is that when we go to Yunnan, we work with mycologists, right? So we don't have to know that much about fungi. We just document it.
Say, hey, what's this?
And so when we arrived in India, we realised that there were no mycologists in that part of India at that time. It's actually changed significantly in a very short period of time, but at that time, who knew about forest fungi. So we became the experts. And that was a bit scary. And, you know, like we're amateur mycologists, really. But we've, you know, through osmosis, we realised we've actually learnt a lot in the last decade. So, and then they started telling us some of the people that we would meet. So they were going to, one of the very first people we were going to meet was the Forest Man of India. Now, I don't know if you know his story, but it went viral on the internet about 5 years ago when an American went over and shot a little film with him, because this man single-handedly has restored the end of Majuli Island, which is the largest river island in the world, but was being eroded away from flood after flood after flood, but because of deforestation. So the forest he's planted now is how many hundreds of hectares?
Well, he's built it up to 700 hectares now. What had happened, the end of the island, it's the downstream end of the island, it was deforested, like timber cutters had come in and cleared the whole lot. And they had a flood and all of these snakes got washed up there and the snakes were dying because then it became really hot and they had nowhere to go. And he felt really sorry for the snakes, all these snakes dying. And he asked people what he needed to do. And they said, plant bamboo. So he started planting bamboo and then he started planting trees and he's moved on. And there are trees there that are 2 meters, 6 foot in diameter.
30 years old.
And they're huge forest trees.
Yeah.
So he's managed to restore the environment there. And there's, wild animals, there's even tigers. He's found tiger footprints there in the forest that he's created.
And endangered species of vultures and, elephants and rhinoceros, they've all come back to his forest. And he's just a humble farmer, really. He's just a subsistence farmer. He doesn't have a lot of money, but he just spends all his energy on replanting this forest. So I knew his story because I saw it when it went viral and I went, oh my God. And he got invited all over the world and was celebrated as a living legend. And
As it should be, yeah.
He just wants to get back to planting
he doesn't
trees.
want to travel anymore. He just wants to look after his cows and plant trees. But anyway, so he invited us to come and look at his forest and see what fungi was growing there. So as soon as I heard that, I thought, oh my God, I've got to film that. I mean, how could I not film it? And of course, then I thought, well, if I'm going to film that, I probably should film a bit more. And given that we don't have any scientists, maybe Steve needs to be the vehicle of this film, actually, as we travel from place to place. So I just started recording the journey as well with this idea that we would do this fungi log, a travel log about fungi. And it just grew and grew and grew, really, because, the places that we went were fabulous. We had actually been to Northeast India before, so I had a little bit of cultural archive. We'd done a little bit of a festival trip twice.
Yeah,
twice in that part of the world.
We were both interested in, I think at one stage I suggested we went to Nagaland. And Catherine said, oh yeah, let's go. And most people in the world have never heard of Nagaland. So we were a bit surprised that the other one had heard of it anyway. So we headed off to Nagaland and Arunachal Pradesh, which is even more remote than Nagaland, really.
We are a bit of a fungi love story, by the way.
Oh yeah, would you mind sharing that with us?
Well, I don't know how much we should share, but we were both on RSVP with some very interesting profile pictures. Steve had fungi and I had dinosaur footprints. And I think we both saw a kindred spirit. And then because I worked at the ABC, I used to work a lot with the community, helping them share stories. So we did a project together on how when it rains, the fungi comes out, using Steve's photographs. So it was just an audio slideshow, really, an interview with Steve, a bit of sound effects and lots of his gorgeous photos. And yeah, we did that and fell in love, really.
Oh, that's so cute.
And we've been making funny things ever since.
That's beautiful. So are you all going to plan on doing more travel guides, like travel logs like this one?
Well,
what's in the works for future projects?
We intend to do one on Yunnan in China, which we've
probably got half shot.
Yeah, we've got a lot of the footage for that. We had intended to do one in Mexico. That's sort of been put on hold.
Yeah. Everything's a little bit on hold because of COVID, but yeah, we definitely had plans. We were also thinking, we have this fungi fetish page and now our Instagram page, which has kind of taken off a bit. And we have an amazing network of fungi people all across the globe. So remember, I don't know if you know, but in the UK in the 1900s, people used to do the grand tour, their grand tour of Europe. And so I'm thinking one of our Planet Fungis will be the Grand Fungi Tour, where we connect up with all these amazing people that we know virtually, like from a 17-year-old in Kolkata who's just recently been chatting with me and who's got obsessed about fungi, to, you know, this guy in Italy who only ever photographs
Believe it's edulous, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Beautiful, beautiful photograph. To a guy who's Vietnamese who lives in Belgium who just does the most stunning photography, and another guy in Czechoslovakia, to, you know, some amazing young scientists in Patagonia. So yeah, so I kind of, and of course, you know, the US. So it feels like there's a story to be told with all of the people who are helping to share the fungi story. It has such momentum, you know, like when we started doing this stuff maybe 7-8 years ago, we were so niche, you know, like no one was that interested in fungi, except for Juliana, of course.
Right.
Just to use an example, that the BBC with their Planet Earth 2, the fungi time-lapse was great, but it really was just sort of slotted in there, and they were
Pretty pictures.
Pretty pictures.
Yeah.
You know, but that got people a little bit more interested. And with Planet Earth 3, I don't suppose I probably shouldn't talk about it too much, but they're trying to too much. Yeah.
But the story of fungi will be bigger. Let's just say that.
Yeah, people are starting to look more at what role fungi plays, rather than just have pretty pictures of mushrooms. So everything has advanced in the last 6 or 7 years, that people are really talking about how fungus fits into the environment and how it's the glue that holds things together. Whereas before it was just, people didn't know what fungus were. They assumed plant, and that was about it. You know, I don't know what they thought. Most people didn't think at all. They just, okay, there's mushrooms come up every now and then.
And we noticed just even this week, the Kew Gardens are advertising that they're doing a whole fungal plant connection global project now. So, you know, that's all about the ecosystem as a whole. I think that's, you know, that's our big revelation, is that we've both been bushwalkers all our lives, really. And, you know, you go into the forest and you see plants, you know, people see the plants. But the huge revelation for us is that we go into a forest now and we see ourselves as just part of this big circle of life, above ground, below ground, you know, fungi or the bacteria or the critters or the earthworms, the trees, knowing that inside those trees there's fungi in, you know, minuscule form. There's people doing research in Cairns and discovering 200 species of fungi inside a single rainforest tree leaf. You know, so it's mind-boggling, and I think people are starting to get that idea of the connection of species on the planet.
That life's a whole. It's not, you can't look at individual species. It's like human beings are millions of different species. You know, our gut has what, more bacteria in it than there are cells in our body.
Right.
And there's hundreds of thousands of different species in there, which I don't know how many are absolutely necessary, but certainly a very large number. But the whole planet is like that. Life is, you know, you go into a forest, it's not a bunch of trees and a bunch of animals. It's a single whole that survives as a whole. And you take away key elements from it, and it won't survive.
Right. Yeah,
So-
that's really exciting for me to hear, because I think that's something that's been really missing in a lot of how people understand the ecosystem and the environment that they live in. And I think it kind of helps facilitate also that thinking of like, yeah, I'm a part of this ecosystem. And it kind of cuts away at that idea that like we're separate, we're distinct from the environment, which I think is kind of how we build the systems that we built that did so much damage to the planet in the first place, is kind of separated ourselves from it.
And the sorry.
We see our role as, you know, trying to help educate people into what is there, not necessarily what we can do with it, just describing it. The complexity of it is just mind-boggling.
And, you know, one of the young scientists that we were working with in India, he said, you can't conserve something if you don't know what's there. So finding out what's there is really important, particularly finding out what's there before you actually get rid of it all. So that's primarily what we see our role as. And, you know, one of the exciting things for me personally about this growth in interest in fungi is that by default, once you learn about fungi, you learn about that connection of everything on the planet. And so it is contributing significantly, I think, to our understanding of thinking about ecosystems as a whole.
For sure.
Shall I get back to the film a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk more about the film. I'd love to hear more.
So the adventure just kept getting bigger and bigger, really. And we ended up going up to Arunachal Pradesh, which is that state that just sits below Tibet and between and India. You know, like it's kind of
Myanmar, Tibet.
Yeah, very highly contested area between India and China. And that's an incredibly culturally diverse area. That's one of those places that Steve was talking about where on every mountaintop, it's kind of more in every valley there, but every valley is a completely different culture.
Mountaintops are a little bit high.
So you've got the you've got the Buddhists over in the west, and then you've got the Hindus over in the east, but then you've got all these people who are animists who live in all the valleys in between. And so the animists were really, they were the first time that we came across in India people who did know a little bit about edible and poisonous fungi in terms of eating forest fungi, which in Yunnan a lot of people know about, but in India that knowledge has been lost. And so that was really great being up in that area and touching base with those forest dwellers. But then we went to Meghalaya, which is one of the wettest places on Earth. In fact, one of the towns there, they say, is the wettest place on Earth, a little bit contested.
They get 12 metres of rain a year, which is nearly 40 feet of rain a year.
Yeah, wow.
And it just falls up, you know, so it is on the border of Bangladesh. And so the rain falls on there and they're sitting up between 3,000 and 4,000 metres, aren't they? Yeah, 3,000 and 4,000 metres. And then it just basically falls onto Bangladesh, you know, and waterfalls like on this escarpment. So we travelled the hills of Meghalaya, including going to this wild festival where there was this, they kept saying, oh, you have to come to this festival, you have to come. It's called Badian Klam, and it's featured in the film. And so we said, okay, yeah, we'd really like to take a day. Well, actually, no, that's not right. I found it on the internet. That's right. And we said to our collaborators, we'd really like to go to this festival. And they'd never heard of it. They lived an hour away in Assam and they'd never heard of Badian Farm. So we went up there, we hooked up with some local guides. And that's the other thing that we do. Whenever we travel, we always have, obviously we're traveling with our scientists, but we also hire a local guide so that we have a way to communicate with the local people so that you can have this really, you know, respectful and...
well, apart from anything, they speak a different language.
Even from our science.
Yeah, in Assam, they speak Assamese, which isn't the same as Hindi. But you go over into Meghalaya and what's the tribal group there?
Well, they're
Kazi.
Yeah.
And they speak Kazi.
Yeah.
And you go onto Google Translate and it doesn't translate Kazi.
But even when we travelled in northeast India just as tourists, we did the same thing. We always hired local guides because you just have a different relationship with the community when you do that. You know, you can have a normal conversation about life and what's important. Anyway, so that's an aside. So anyway, so we went into this village and there was this big kind of round cement pond in the middle of the town. So it was like going to a football stadium.
With a stadium around the pond.
And then there was this kind of muddy pond in the middle of it. And we thought, oh my God, what are they going to do with that? And so first of all, we joined people as houses were beaten to get rid of evil spirits, and people were given, lots of rice wine and pan, which is chewing tobacco.
Pan being betel nut.
Betel nut. And then we went down to this stadium, and these two teams lined up on either side. And we thought, what on earth are they going to do? And then they just ran into this dirty, muddy water, went mad in there for like an hour, and then ran back out again. And then that happened a number of times with different teams. And then they had built these huge towers called rocks, which they then also brought into the pool. Like kids, family, only men, only all the women were dressed up in all their finery. But these huge towers being carried, no occupational health and safety.
And virtually no tourists. We were the only Western tourists there. There was a handful of Indian tourists, but it was a festival which was all just for the local people.
Yeah.
So it wasn't...
Wasn't a media event.
Yeah, it wasn't. So they were just people having fun, and everyone got involved.
Yeah. So those sorts of experiences are truly special. I mean, who would have thought Fungi would get us to things like that?
Right.
And then in Megalia, they have these forests. They've set aside areas that they called sacred groves. And so it's kind of like our national park system, but they're holy places. So you can't remove anything out of them. If you do, there's all these stories of doom and disaster will come into your life if you take a rock or a stick or even go to the toilet in the forest. So we spent a lot of time in sacred groves because they're a biodiversity, capsule, if you like. And so that was pretty amazing. And then we went to Marciniak, which is on the border of Bangladesh, which is where the luminous fungi was. So as soon as we saw the luminous fungi, we always ask if anybody knows if they've got luminous fungi, always. And usually people say no. But when they said, well, we already knew because
they say, of course.
Yes, of course. And so at that point, I knew I had a whole film because it had this amazing trajectory, and luminous fungi we know is such a wow for people that we had this lovely dramatic find that we knew was new to science. So, yeah.
And the very best part of the film is this woman that we met there.
Of course.
We were introduced to as Kong, which just means sister in Kazi. But she spoke no English at all, not a word.
She learned a few words from us.
She learned a few words in the end from us. But she's
die or no die.
She's one of these people you can put on film. They don't need to speak English. She was just a born actor. She would just describe things. She described how she tried a poisonous mushroom because she'd been left. Her husband had died when I think she had five children. Mm-hmm. And she had no money, so she had to go out and survive herself. So she would eat mushrooms and various other things that she found. But she didn't know which were the good mushrooms to eat, which weren't. She picked up a bit of information. So she tried the occasional poisonous mushroom, which she described in great detail.
She's featured in our trailer, actually. She's so hilarious. She's so funny.
And she's exactly the same age as I am. She's still climbing trees, which she did just to prove she could.
And she has actually, one of the nice things, because we went back twice. So I did do some pickups the second year we went back to Northeast India because we didn't have the gear to properly film the luminous mushroom at Marciniak. And there were a couple of other little pickups that I did, interviews with the local scientists. But we went back to the village and showed her scenes in the film and to clear with her that she was okay about us using it the way that we were going to. And she has become really famous in Meghalaya now. She got this tourism award for inspiring people to come to Meghalaya for fungi. and got flown to or driven to Assam to attend a big conference. And so she's gone from being this, grandma looking after this family by eating off the forest to being quite a celebrity. I think she really likes it.
That's gotta be fun. So do you have anything else about the film that you want to kind of get out? Because I have another question that kind of gets away from that topic.
We'll start streaming on the 1st of November on Amazon, iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, and our website. We do encourage people, if they're not kind of hooked into using those other websites, to use ours, because we get more of the money that way.
It's Planet Fungi.
Fungi.movie. So
planetfungi.movie.
www.planetfungi.movie, and proceeds are going back to the Bioluminescence Foundation, so they get 10% of all profit, and then the rest of the money we'll put to making more Planet Fungi projects. A lot of the stuff that we do is totally for free, so on our YouTube channel you can watch heaps and heaps of short videos, but this Planet Fungi series we're hoping will start to drive itself in terms of being able to afford it, because so far it's all self-funded and the Bioluminescence's contribution in terms of on-ground costs. So, yeah. So, yeah, if you can stream it from our website, it's much better.
Okay, will do. Yeah, I'll pass the word along. And we'll obviously include a link in all our descriptions and all the places where we post this video. But my question was, so what are some of the differences between mycophobic cultures and mycophilic cultures? Do the names differ for similar mushrooms, or how? I guess since you both have experience with both of them, how would you say they're different? Because in the United States we have a very mycophobic culture. So
yeah, not as mycophobic as we are.
Yeah,
I think Australia's one extreme, because we don't have a lot of. In North America, there's quite a lot of mushrooms that you can eat that come up in profusion, whereas in Australia, that's probably not really so true. But the basic difference is, in Yunnan, I think there's we've been to one of these cities, but there's about 5 of them that are just dedicated to mushrooms. You go in, there's murals of mushrooms painted on the walls. You can go to markets that are just mushrooms.
Restaurants that only cook mushroom meals.
And everyone knows about mushrooms.
An office assistant in High Hills will know about mushrooms. Everybody knows.
Whereas in Australia, and to some extent in North America, that people are very cautious about eating mushrooms and certainly know very little about them. So in Australia, people will basically only eat mushrooms they buy in a supermarket. So they won't go out and pick mushrooms in the field. I think I did as a kid, but we were probably exceptional in that respect.
Probably a little bit different down in the southern states where there's a lot more European influence, but we have a lot of mushroom poisonings every year as well. So
yeah, people go out and they eat
lookalikes.
Amanita phalloides growing under oak trees accidentally. Every now and then you'll get, I think there was a family that ate them, and I think there were several died in Canberra about 5 or 10 years back.
But a lot of fungi has similar names across cultures. So auricularia, what we call the forestier, has names, throughout Asia that are all about it looking like an ear. But in terms of them having different species, like scientific names, well, not really, because that work is just being done. As I said, a lot of the forest fungi that we're documenting in Asia is only now being described by science.
Right.
So it is being described with DNA bar testing and taxonomy. So hopefully that won't be the case where there's a lot of different species. There's certainly a lot of lookalikes that get mistaken, though. One of the reasons they wanted us to go to Myanmar was that there had been a lot of poisonings, like death poisonings, in the last 12 months prior to us going there. and they did suspect that there was a mushroom that was an Amanita phalloides family mushroom that was responsible. And certainly we documented one there that turned out to be Amanita phalloides. And
yeah, and interestingly, I posted it on one of the
Instagram.
social media sites, yeah, and someone there, I said it was Amanita phalloides group, and I had someone from North America correct me and say, no, this is an edible mushroom.
Yeah.
Well, taxonomy friends had done DNA sequencing on it, and it was Amanita phalloides group.
Yeah.
Right.
So
If you ate it, would be definitely a mistake.
yeah.
And yet you'll get people who will say, no, you can eat this one.
Based on the taxonomy. So because it didn't look like an Amanita phalloides in North America. So we get that a lot because we deal a lot with subtropical fungi, which is in Asia, that there's stuff that looks similar but is completely different genetically. So people have to be a little bit careful about applying what they know from a North American or a European or a UK perspective to fungi that's coming up in forests in Asia and vice versa. So,
Right.
yeah, so that happens. And in fact, when we were in Nepal, they were picking a mushroom, like the locals were very into this particular Amanita. And it looks so similar to the one in Myanmar, but it wasn't. It was presumably edible.
It looked like, what's the destroying angel? It's another Amanita, like phalloides, but it's pure white.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this one was a pure white Amanita, which I'd go, whoa, I don't think I want to be involved with that.
Look, every mycologist we know says don't eat Amanitas.
Yeah, it just, if you're doing it and there's some very nice Amanitas, but
you just don't know. We're
just very cautious with Amanitas because 90% of the mushroom poisonings in the world are because of Amanitas.
Yeah.
Right.
And half of them are Amanita phalloides. So
Yeah, I'm the same way. I don't. I tend to. I'll stay away from anything that I think is an Amanita, even if it's like something that's supposed to be like. We don't have. We're a little too dry where we live, so we don't come across them that often. But when we do go places where they're at, I'm not convinced and or not confident enough, or don't even really want to risk it.
no,
Yeah.
certainly not from sight, because most of the people who in, say, Asia who get poisoned are not from that area. They're refugees or have moved in and are not familiar with the local mushrooms. So then they possibly came from an area where you could eat any mushroom and not get poisoned. So they'd move in and they'd try any mushroom. So there'd be poisonings.
Right.
People who had been there for generations, usually the daring ones maybe didn't survive. I don't know.
Right.
I agree with Katie. If in doubt, throw it out.
Yeah.
And there's also a very well-known, I think it's Czechoslovakian saying that every mushroom is edible if only once.
Right. Yes. Those Amanitas are definitely the kind that you only eat once.
Well, I did read that, I don't know how you verify this, but they're meant to actually taste quite nice. So if you eat Amanita phalloides, it's not a matter of going, oh, they taste horrible, they must be poisonous. The reputation they've got is they actually taste quite good. So
right, yeah.
You'll tend to eat quite a lot of them.
Yeah, exactly. I've heard that too, where you won't even save a sample of it. And then when you start to have an issue, you can't like even tell a doctor what it is. And then it's usually so far, like the way it messes up your liver, it's like a few, almost like a day later. And at that point, the damage is really done.
That's right. It's liver transplant territory.
Right.
Yeah, get a liver transplant in 2 weeks. It's really not very easy.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So especially in the United States where we don't have the healthcare to handle that, I would highly recommend being very careful.
I don't think anyone's got the healthcare to handle that particular one.
Well, right. But I mean, if you did get stuck with a bill, it would be pretty devastating. That's what I was talking about. So what are the mushrooms like in Australia? Because it's a very different, it's obviously the isolation of the continent, you know, y'all have marsupials. Is there a similar kind of effect with the fungi down there?
Yes, well, if you look back at the geology, that Australia was part of Gondwana land. So there was Australia, South America, part of Africa and India were all lumped in the remains of the supercontinent, and then they split up. So there's a lot of similarities between South America and Australia, particularly the southern part of South America.
So this mushroom, for instance, is a classic for that. So that's Mycenia interrupta. There's a very similar mushroom in New Zealand. There's a very similar mushroom in Chile.
The one in New Zealand is probably the same species. The one in Chile is a different species. It's not quite as blue, but it's very similar. And we found a lot of similarities in Chile to Australian mushrooms, but the Northern Hemisphere mushrooms in general, the mass of them are different. But you can get strange effects, like migratory birds can transport mushrooms. So we can get, I've found the same mushrooms in Tasmania and high in the mountains in Yunnan. You go, that's a strange connection, but there's migratory birds that fly between Siberia and Australia, so very easily can take spores with them. So you get connections. There are a certain percentage of mushrooms that are the same, but there does tend to be quite a lot of difference. Where we are, they're mainly saprobes, which are the mushrooms that recycle dead material, usually dead wood, whereas, say, in cool temperate climates like Tasmania or the northern states in the United States, there's mainly pine trees, which tend to be associated with ectomycorrhizal mushrooms. And there's a lot more edible species in the ectomycorrhizals.
That said, though, we do have a lot of eucalypt forests. So, I mean, you know, this is the thing, you can get thrown off by the fact that what we're talking about is the fruiting body of mushrooms. So eucalypts have ectomycorrhizal relationships with native truffles. So there's probably a lot of fungi that we don't even know about in the forests around us. We're talking about the rainforest tends to be mostly saprophytic.
Yeah, and the eucalypt forest is about 10% of the world's trees, that's in number of species, that are associated with ectomycorrhizal mushrooms. But the species are things like pine trees, oaks, elms, I think. Eucalypts, Nothofagus. Nothofagus is a tree that's southern hemisphere only. But trees that are associated with ectomycorrhizal, we'll just take pine trees for a start.
Yeah, the biggest groups of trees.
Yeah.
Basically, so
not many species, but there's a hell of a lot of trees.
So yeah, so we do get that here. So Australia, of course, is very like the States. It's a very diverse ecosystems, from our environments to cool temperate rainforests to tropical rainforests up north. And so we'll see different fungi in each of those forests. So we see a lot of fungus in this Victoria and Tasmania that is similar to the cooler places that we travel to in Asia, boletes, russulas, Cortinarius, which we occasionally see Cortinarius here. We occasionally see boletes and russulas here, but in our eucalypt forest. So yeah, those ectomycorrhizals we don't tend to get en masse. And then when we've been north to the dame trees, similarly, it tends to be more saprobes. And we think that's got to do with soil. We think maybe the rainforests, because the soils are so rich, they might not need as many ectomycorrhizal mushrooms.
Well, it varies a bit. Like our particular rainforest is fairly rich volcanic soil. So the trees can access the nutrients in the soil quite easily. And the fungi's main role there is in breaking down dead trees and recycling the nutrients. They're crucially important for doing that, because the fungi weren't there, we just build up big coal seams,
Right.
so the forest wouldn't survive. But in some tropical rainforests that we've been to, for instance in Yunnan, they get a lot of ectomycorrhizals.
That's true. That's true.
So their soil is not as easy for plants to get the nutrient out of.
We think that's what's happening. We think that's what's happening, but there is a lot of research being done all over the world at the moment on fungi exists in soils. So taking handfuls of soils. I know in Yunnan, they've actually taken soil samples from all over Yunnan, and now they're researching what fungi species are in those soils. So then they can start to map the whole of the state via its fungi, and then you'll start to see what relationships fungus has with particular soil types, particular forest types.
Yeah.
Oh,
go ahead, Steve.
In general, the more extreme the conditions, like if it's very cold or very dry, then more ectomycorrhizal fungi will grow. Like in the deep south of down in Tasmania, the trees are predominantly, there's some eucalypts, but then there's nothofagus. In Chile, there's nothofagus. In North America and Europe, there's pine trees. Siberia, there's pine trees. And they're all ectomycorrhizal. In the tropics, so as the temperature gets warmer, you get more of the saprobes coming up. But that's just observation.
That's interesting. I never thought about that, but that made me think of two things: that the nutrients being available, like you said, in the volcanic soils, it kind of lines up with what we know about when people try and inoculate their plants with mycorrhizal, and if there's too much nutrients bioavailable nutrients in the substrate, then the plants won't form that association because they just don't need to. The nutrients are bioavailable. They're not gonna spend the energy to come up with that relationship. But then also you're talking about how in the harsher climates that are more temperate, that get more larger swings in temperature than the tropics do, that the root systems of these trees also kind of act as like a refuge for those fungi whenever the climate might get a little extreme in there, but they're still able to carry out some sort of metabolism or be buffered by the not only the duff of the trees and stuff like that, but just by the root systems itself.
Yeah, I'd say there's several PhD theses working in that.
Well, hopefully we can inspire somebody tonight to get their research project figured out. Some poor grad student who's lost in the woods. But maybe that's where they want to be, right? They study fungi. Well, we have been going for about an hour and a half. So if y'all have anything more, now would be a good time to do it, or we can go ahead and wrap it up and do the website plugs again.
Does anybody have any questions? Any more questions?
Yeah, just let's open it up to some more questions in the chats. Get the other chat going. I'm not seeing any questions roll in. Oh, okay. First time you remember loving nature.
Oh.
It's a tough one.
Well, I'm very lucky. I grew up in a place called the Blue Mountains, which is outside west of Sydney, and it's a huge national park. We lived on the edge of, so I grew up, and I was a girl guide. So I grew up bushwalking, swimming in creeks, So, and it's always been my sanctuary, But it's funny. I've always felt that I'm pretty insignificant within that. Like Steve and I both, we're not humanists, like we don't see ourselves as one species on a planet of species. And I think I've always kind of felt that when I've been in the forest, that, I'm just another species.
we tend not to anthropomorphize
Yeah.
the fungus. That some people look at fungus and say, what can that fungus do for me?
Yeah.
Or what can it do for
People-centric.
mankind?
Yeah.
And we tend to look at it just as how does that fungus interact with other life forms? You know, what does it do? How does it live?
How's it all
So,
connected? So yeah, I think I've always had that, and I've always been a photographer. So I started my career as a photographer. So in the forest, I've always documented the minute and the magnificent, you know, like the big panorama as well. And I love the way that our passion, you know, the first time we did a time lapse, I can remember it. We'd read the weather report and we'd heard that there was a thunderstorm coming through that afternoon, and we said, let's head up to the border ranges. There's a lookout there where you can look out behind this magnificent mountain called Mount Warning, or Wollumbin is the local Aboriginal name for it. And we thought that would be a good place to try a time lapse. So we went up there with our 2 cameras and our tripods. No shutter release, you know, just our fingers.
Yeah, we're sitting there and the camera going click, click.
But, you know,
It worked.
We did it for 4 hours, you know, like I'd never been to that lookout and stayed there for 4 hours before people would come and go, you know. I think we're a bit mad standing there as the rain came down over us.
We started off and there was a storm over Mount Warning. Mount Warning's the old volcanic plug.
Yeah. So it's pretty dramatic mountaintop.
And we're standing at on the Pinnacles lookout, so looking down a cliff into the caldera, and the centre of the caldera is the old volcanic plug. There's a storm over Mount Warning, and as we watched, it came straight towards us. So we went from sunlight to in the middle of the fog and rain. And then afterwards, the fog cleared and we could look directly down onto a rainbow. There was a rainbow in the valley, not over there.
All captured by our time lapse. Like, this is our first time lapse. So
that's easy, isn't it?
Never captured anything quite as dramatic as that again. But my point was, we stood there for 4 hours, you know, in a place that people just kind of come out, they go, oh, look at the view, gorgeous, click, click, leave. And I love the fact that, you know, and we saw it in all these different moods, you know, and light and, and smells, you know, and I love the fact that what we do keeps us in the forest.
Yeah, we go out and you stop in one spot, you photograph a fungus, and almost inevitably where you stop, you go, oh, there's another thing that's interesting. You start to notice things around you which you wouldn't have done at all if you just walked through it.
And that can just be fungus. I mean, often Steve will stop to take a photograph and I'd go, gee, there's not much fungus here today.
Yeah, photograph a snake or something.
No. And then you stop and then you go, oh, there's some fungi. Oh, there's some fungi. And then, you know, it really is, it's a special thing, I think, that our scientific interest or our scientific passion has takes us where we love being.
So just a passion for the beauty of it as well. I remember photographing this green mushroom in Tasmania, and it's really quite bright green. But the trouble is it grows in moss, and moss is bright green as well. So bright green mushroom and bright green moss, very difficult to find. And I found one, and I was busy down there photographing it. Then when I finished, I looked around me to see if I could see any more, and I found I was kneeling in a whole patch of them. I'd never even seen them.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I guess for both of us, we've loved nature all our life is the very short question. Question.
Hard to pinpoint a moment in time. What another question from the chat is, what is your favorite culinary mushroom, and then how do you like it prepared? It's always a tough question.
It is, because we've had a lot of. I don't really like mushrooms normally.
big confession.
Yeah. But in Yunnan, they have some. Well, there's some mushrooms there that are very expensive, but they have some beautiful mushrooms. But they know how to cook them as well. And from what I've learnt, that you can't just grab a mushroom, put it in your mouth, taste it, and know what it's going to be like when it's cooked properly. Like the Chinese, I think they possibly go a bit overboard, but they say this mushroom you must cook with
This
fish.
way, yeah.
Cook it this way. Some mushrooms you need to you can fry them. Other mushrooms you need to boil first and then fry them. So it's all quite complex.
But we have sat down to meals, like we met up with a mushroom distributor, like he'd buy off the locals and then sell to Japan and Europe. And I mean, the locals earn a lot of money out of some of these mushrooms, like matsutake. Oh my gosh, they earn a fortune out of those.
Japanese like it.
Japanese like them. Yeah, but so we sat down to a meal of probably 20 different mushrooms in that meal that they cooked for us. They just kept bringing out different ones. And last year we went to the King of the Mushroom Festival, which they have like this MasterChef competition. So all these, really well-known chefs in China come to the King of the Mushroom competition, and they all make different dishes, including desserts, with mushrooms, and then they get judged, and they have the winning chef, and the meal that won there was sturgeon with
caviar, like real caviar.
Sturgeon from Canada,
real caviar from Russia, and the mushrooms. Well, if you've got sturgeon and caviar to start with, you're not going to go too far.
But one of the ones that we like cooked locally, really love, is one called Tomatomyces. And I don't know whether it's just because we're a little bit passionate about Tomatomyces' story as well, because Tomatomyces grows in mutualistic relationship with termites. So basically you'll find Tomatomyces fruiting on top of a current or old termite nest. And the termites farm the fungus. So basically they farm the mycelium because they can't digest wood, the lignin in the wood, themselves. So or cellulose. So they use the mycelium to break down the lignin and the cellulose, and then they eat the mycelium. So that happens deep underground. And then they always leave enough of the mycelium so that it can continue to grow and fruit and spread. And then the mushroom comes up, and they come up from a very big depth, so often a metre down. So the mushroom has a very pointy top, very hard, so that it can push its way all the way up. And it is one of the most delicious mushrooms we've ever had. And they grow really big in Africa. They can grow up to a metre or two wide, can't they?
1 metre. There's quite a few different species of them. They only grow in Asia and Africa.
Yeah.
Because there aren't any Tomatomyces. There aren't any termites that are mutualistically involved with mushrooms in North America.
That we know of.
You've got leafcutter ants that do the same thing. Mm-hmm. So ants are associated with mushrooms, but the mushrooms they're associated with tend to be ones that live separately as well. The Tomatomyces in Asia are only associated with termites. They don't grow by themselves at all. So it's...
And there's big ones and small ones, and they're all yummy. And they just fry them. They just fry them with garlic and ginger and a little bit of chili.
Yeah, we got off the subject of how to cook them.
That sounds delicious.
We do always ask the locals how they cook. In fact, in Planet Fungi, Yunnan, we went out with which we haven't done yet, edited yet, but there's a scene in there where we go out into a pine forest with an older local woman, and every different, we must have seen probably about 10 beliefs, and she had a different way of cooking each of them.
Yeah, the Chinese are very specific. They take something and say, this must be cooked this way. And it's a good way to start, certainly.
And if you ever go to Yunnan, I really highly recommend trying to time it with the King of the Mushroom Festival. It is a...
They have boletes there that are, 2 meters across. They
Wow.
grow them, they have farms to grow them, and they'll grow them across several years, and they have competitions.
Mm.
And it might be a couple $1,000 for a big Ganoderma.
Yeah, Ganoderma, he meant. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't.
Ratio.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
That's wow, that's amazing. That's like the size of a tabletop or something.
Yeah, it is.
No, it looks exactly
Absolutely.
like a tabletop.
Wow. That's so cool. I would love to. I've seen a picture of that. I've never. I would love to see one in person.
Well, I totally filmed the King of the Mushroom Festival with Steve interacting with all these people. So that'll be a scene in Planet Fungi Yunnan when I finally get around to editing it.
What time of the year is that festival?
We were there last year in
August, was it? Or-
August, yeah.
Yeah, somewhere around then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mushroom season. being
Mushroom
August.
season, yeah.
Okay. That's amazing. I would love to visit China. I'm not sure when that will be. I'll be able to work that out, especially with the travel restrictions due to COVID. But
Yeah. I suspect that China's going to be one of the more COVID easier places to travel sooner than most, just because they've got it under control there.
right.
Mm.
Seems like everyone's doing better than the United States. That's for sure.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. We don't need to get into that. I'll just go off and we'll be here for another 2 hours.
I mean, it's hard to know. We're in a bubble that we can travel into another state, but the restrictions are still pretty full on in Australia, and they will remain that way until it looks like
Until they ground it down to
vaccine.
virtually nothing, or
We get a vaccine, yeah. Someone in the chat said Roni's sad trombones. Actually, I edited that a little bit, but wah wah wah.
yeah,
Any other questions?
Yeah, any more questions out there in the internet world and in the chat? It's been a fascinating chatting with y'all. Oh, I actually had one more question. What would do you have any tips for photography for beginners? Like how can people kind of like take their mushroom photography kind of up to the next level, maybe without having to spend a lot of money on a new camera that's like super nice or something like that?
I'll do a little plug because in collaboration with the film coming out on the 1st of November, we've also done a masterclass on video that'll be quite affordable. So we do a masterclass almost everywhere we go in the world. Steve does a photography masterclass. So the video covers taking a single shot, so getting the best fungi photograph with not doing what we call focus stacking, because Steve's a focus stacked. Taking a fungi photograph with your mobile phone, taking a focus stack photo, and then post-producing a focus stacked photo. So that, we're going to have it available on a couple of different platforms. You can buy it as a package with the film if you do it on Facebook or on our website. But some quick tips. You want to give them some quick tips?
Yeah, the biggest tip is probably avoid the sunshine. Because most people seem to think that sunshine is better. Well, you get more light that way, but the mushrooms look terrible in general. You've got bright and dark, and the camera can't cope. So I find the best time for taking mushrooms is when it's overcast. The very best time is just after it's rained, because the water on the mushrooms brings out the colour, and you don't have bright areas and shadows.
But you can't put water on a mushroom and then take a photograph of it because it'll be glinting if it's wet.
Yeah.
So it's kind of after rain.
You just need moisture in the air.
Yeah.
And the other thing is use a reflector sometimes.
Shall I go and get them?
Yeah.
I'll show you our reflector.
It's very expensive.
High-tech film equipment.
High-tech film equipment. This is
Secrets of the pros.
So for people on a limited budget, aluminium foil. Not even that big. You can. Because mushrooms in general are very small. So just something like this, the same way you'll see on film sometimes with people with big reflectors holding it up next to someone's face to get a bit of light on their face. Use a bit of aluminium foil to get a bit of light underneath the mushroom, because often underneath the mushroom is
one I prepared earlier.
This is a little Japanese friend of ours who makes.
Can you see how that puts the light up?
Growing mushrooms?
I don't know, you probably can't.
It's subtle.
It tends not.
Yeah, you can see it. Yeah.
Luminous fungi.
Yeah, they're about the right colour too.
Yeah, so they're probably the two tips. We do carry an umbrella into the forest, partly for our gear, but mostly to shadow the fungi so that you can get nice even light, both on it and the background. Try and get a little bit of distance between the fungi and the background. If it's a saprophytic fungi, you can pick the stick up. Try and always put it back where you found it so that the forest is left the same for anybody else who's coming through. We were in Tasmania during fungi season a couple of years ago, and there were photographers everywhere taking fungi, and honestly, they destroyed the forest. It was a little bit sad for the next person coming through.
It had a beautiful fungus, and after they'd gone there, it was all sort of cleared away and didn't look quite right.
Yeah, so we try and leave the forest the same way we found it. But if it's a saprobe, you can pick the fungus up, put it a little bit of distance away from the background. So your camera is
a nice dark background.
Nice dark background. If it's in the ground and there's a lot of leaf litter and sticks around it, maybe just do a little bit of gardening and clear around, but then try and put it back.
But not too much gardening.
Not too much.
It's something I used to do more of, and I realised that sometimes you'd change things, and only after you looked at the photograph did you realise that you removed maybe some of the most interesting things or damaged the fungus by touching it and things like this.
Yeah.
So at least half of fungi photography, or any photography that matter, is finding a good subject. So you can be the best photographer in the world. If you haven't found a good mushroom, you're never going to take a good mushroom photograph.
And then getting the light right.
Yeah.
So you kind of got to think about the mushrooms like taking a portrait of someone, you know?
Right.
Yeah. And then the other thing about mushroom, if you're doing it for taxonomy, it's always good. And if you've got permission to do specimens, then it's always good to have, for the structural stuff, the top of the mushroom and the bottom of the mushroom. So if we have got permission, if we're collecting specimens, then if we pick one, we'll make sure that we get, the whole of the structure, so that if we send it to a mycologist, they've got a really good chance of identifying it as a combination between the specimen and the pictures.
Yeah. You hear that out there, internet land? Send us pictures of the tops and the gills if you want your IDs. If you want your IDs, we gotta have all the information, and they gotta be nice and in focus.
One of the things I'll be posting for free on our YouTube channel and Facebook and Instagram in the not too distant future, I've just got to get this film out there and birthed, but is a piece that we did in India on how to collect specimens. So the information that you need to observe in the field before you collect the specimen, and then before you dry it, the notes that you take, the measurements that you take, the observations that you make, and then how to dry the specimen. So I will get that maybe up around Christmas time, I hope, but that'll be just there for free for anybody to use.
Very cool. One more final question. Do the mushroom photos respond if you talk to them, or do the mushrooms respond if you talk to them, like Austin Powers or something?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Good. I'll have to remember that next time.
I think if you treat your subject with respect, then you'll always get something back.
And, just such cool stuff. I mean, I just keep thinking of things that have happened. So this Mycena interrupter, we went to Tasmania last year and we wanted to try and time-lapse it because we figured it's probably a pretty fast-growing mushroom. but we didn't have that long. We only had like 3 weeks in Tasmania and only
A
you know,
week.
a few days in different places. So we allocated 5 days to be in this place where we were staying in a caravan park, in a caravan, like a cabin, because it's damn cold down there in April. And they had an old brick building, which was an old explosive store. Yeah. That they said that we could use to do time-lapse in. So we created a time-lapse studio down there, and the Mycenia interrupted. It was cold and it wasn't growing very fast. And so it was a bit of a disappointing time-lapse. But then we saw that there was a web being spun underneath it. And we thought, oh, there's a spider doing something interesting underneath the fungi. And then we saw that the web, at the heart of the web was like this grub that looked a little bit like a glowworm, right? And we thought, oh, that's pretty cool if it's a glowworm.
Yeah, blue fungus with glowing glowworms.
But then we did a little bit of research and we realised that it's a
Fungi gnat.
A fungi gnat larva, and that they live off the spores of fungi. And so,
Wow.
you know, it's like every time we do something, so that's not talking to the mushroom and making it, but
The
you know,
mushroom's talking to you.
yeah, it's this experimentation where, you know, if you try something and then you get another question, like the science raises another, whatever you're doing raises another question, and then in finding out the answer to that question, you find out this amazing wow piece of science. So now we've become very interested in fungi gnats, and we went to Yunnan not long after, and they were cultivating a mushroom in their laboratory to see if they could use it as an edible in the villages. And underneath them all were these webs. And I said to them, I reckon they're fungi gnat webs. And they went, no. Anyway, so they got their entomology, mycology person to come up and have a look at it. And sure enough,
Fungi gnats.
no one noticed before.
Very cool. Wow.
And the webs are spun directly underneath the caps, and they're thick with spores. It's quite clear what, you know, you'll get the stem coming up and there's a hole in the web for the stem to go through. And then the rest of the cap is just web underneath, collecting all the spores. So the fungi gnats live off the spores, plus maybe the occasional insect to supplement their diet.
And then Steve went back through one of his photographs and realised that there were probably fungi gnat webs under quite a few photographs he'd taken in the past.
I'd assumed they were spiders. They're not quite the same as spider webs.
Right.
So look out for fungi gnat webs.
Cool. Someone was wanting to know who made the lamp, the mushroom lamp that you showed.
A little guy in Japan. He doesn't export them overseas. So he asked Steve if he could use his Mycena chlorophyll photographs as the basis for a design. And then Steve's son was going overseas to Japan last year, and he went and visited him and got us one.
Yeah, he appeared on This Is Colossal.
Yeah.
So if you search back on This Is Colossal, you probably find him, but he doesn't send them overseas, unfortunately.
Yeah, they're pretty cool, aren't they? We've adorned ours with spider webs.
Yeah, we've got a lot of spiders outside, so anything you put outside gets adorned with spider webs.
Well, I think we're done. We're no more questions in the chat, and it's getting kind of late here. So I think it's about time for us to sign off. But thank you so much, Steve and Catherine, for joining us tonight. Everybody who's tuning in and watching the recording later on, check out planetfungi.movie or planetfungi.movie, depending on what accent you use to say it. And, check it out. It'll be streaming November 1st, and check out be on the lookout for the masterclass, and follow the Planet Fungi on YouTube and Instagram and on Facebook, and also follow us, Central Texas Mycology, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch. YouTube, I think there's more. Check out our website. Check out our membership page. To help support more content like this. And yeah, thanks everybody for stopping by tonight and
Thank you
and
very
tuning
much.
in.
Yeah, really appreciate it. We love talking to you all over there.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again sometime, and hopefully we can hopefully we can meet up in person sometime in the future
Yeah,
soon.
that would be great.
Come over here.
And where
Oh yeah,
US,
I would love to.
US is definitely on our travel list.
Yeah, we may get over there, probably not next year, maybe the year
2022.
after.
Yeah.
2022. We'll plan on it. Well, hopefully we'll be able to have our mushroom festival then, and y'all can maybe show a film or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would
Dream big, everybody. Dream big. Put good vibes out into the universe, and hopefully we can do it. So, good night, everybody. Thanks